Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep on the Soviet Lunik III mission.
Oh, this one's fascinating.
Yeah, back in 1959.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got some really interesting sources to dig into. We've got some declassified intelligence reports, technical journals, even some Soviet propaganda.
To really understand the context.
Exactly. So if you're wondering why this mission matters, well, Lunik III was the very first to capture those images of the far side of the moon.
Huge achievement at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Captivated the whole world. But of course, behind the scenes, there was a whole intelligence battle going on.
Oh, for sure.
We're going to uncover what the U.S. knew about Soviet capabilities, and we're going to delve into this story that honestly sounds like it's straight out of a spy film. The CIA's covert operation to borrow a Lunik spacecraft.
It really is wild.
I know.
You've got to try and picture the atmosphere back then. It's 59, the Soviets have already launched Sputnik, then Lunik II.
They were on a roll.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And the U.S. was feeling the pressure big time. Every single Soviet success just fueled this fear of a missile gap.
Right, that idea that they were way ahead in military tech.
Exactly. The public was really gripped by it.
And, to add insult to injury, the Soviets were sending these exhibitions all around the world, showing off their space achievements.
Yeah, kind of rubbing it in a bit.
Right. Including a Lunik spacecraft. It felt like they were just flaunting their progress.
It's really interesting looking back at those sources. The U.S. intelligence was desperately trying to figure out what was real and what was Soviet boasting. Because they were masters of propaganda, you have to give them that.
Oh, for sure.
They knew how to emphasize their successes, talk up the safety of their program, and always hint at that next big leap, like sending a human into space.
Yeah, always one step ahead.
Right. And all of this put immense pressure on the U.S., not just to keep up technologically, but to manage how the public saw it all.
It was a high-stakes game on multiple fronts.
Yeah.
Then, on October 3rd, 1959, they launched Lunik III.
Ambitious goal.
With this goal of photographing the far side of the moon. And Western intelligence initially wasn't even sure if they'd pulled it off.
A lot of unknowns.
The Soviets were very secretive, initially suggesting it was a much closer lunar flyby than what actually happened.
Trying to keep their cards close to their chest.
Exactly.
And this secrecy created huge challenges for U.S. intelligence. They relied a lot on ELINT, electronic intelligence.
Yeah, trying to listen in on their communications.
Exactly. Imagine trying to eavesdrop on a conversation in a crowded room, but you don't even know the language they're speaking.
That's a great analogy.
That's basically what they were doing, trying to intercept Lunik III's telemetry data, but having to calculate trajectories on the fly to even aim their antennas.
Wow.
They didn't even know what frequencies the Soviets were using. It was a race against time to get accurate information for public statements, but more importantly, for those decision makers trying to figure out what is the Soviet threat.
And they were relying on places like Jodrell Bank.
Oh, yeah.
That huge radio telescope in the UK.
For that long-range listening, crucial.
So how did they manage to solve this puzzle with all this pressure mounting?
Well, they were able to analyze that telemetry data, even though it was fragmented, and reveal some key aspects of the mission.
So they were piecing it together bit by bit.
Yeah, and by tracking the discarded ICBM booster tanks, they could actually learn about its range and payload capacity.
So even the trash was valuable intel.
Oh, absolutely. It was meticulous detective work, calibrating instruments, analyzing those signals, and correlating all this data from different sources.
I bet that was tough.
Oh, yeah.
So what did they learn? What did they figure out about the Soviet ICBM?
Well, what they deduced had implications far beyond just the space race.
This wasn't just about prestige anymore.
Right. It was about understanding the true potential of Soviet military technology. What did it mean for the U.S.?
That's a chilling thought.
And speaking of uncovering secrets, this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, I love this part.
So the Soviets are touring their space achievements, right? Including a Lunik spacecraft. And the CIA decides to, borrow one.
Wait, seriously, borrow?
Borrow.
How did they get their hands on an actual Soviet spacecraft?
It wasn't easy.
Did they just stroll into the exhibition and walk out with it?
Not quite. It was incredibly meticulous, a covert operation. They tracked that exhibition from city to city, waiting for the perfect moment to intercept the Lunik while it was in transit.
So they were playing the long game.
They needed lax security and a secure location where they could work undetected for hours.
This was a planned heist. What kind of details did they have to figure out to make this work?
Everything.
Wow.
They had to rely on a network of agents, informants to keep tabs on the Lunik's every move. Teams were monitoring the Soviet security detail, ready to pounce when the moment was right. They even arranged a decoy truck to divert attention from the real Lunik.
This is like something straight out of a movie. They really thought of everything.
Mm.
But were they able to actually pull it off without the Soviets noticing? Did they get the Lunik away?
It seems so. They got lucky. The Lunik was shipped separately from the rest of the exhibit, and it arrived late at one of the venues.
Ah, so a little bit of chaos worked in their favor?
Exactly. This gave them the chance to grab it during transport from the exhibition grounds to the train station. They diverted the truck to this prearranged spot, a salvage yard with a high fence, worked through the night, meticulously disassembling and photographing components while maintaining radio silence.
Wow, talk about pressure, no margin for error. And they did all this disguised as locals, blending in.
It was a high-stakes operation.
But as fascinating as this mission is, we need to know.
Yeah.
What did they learn? What did they find by examining this borrowed Lunik?
That's what we'll uncover as we keep going. Stay with us.
So we left off with the CIA actually managing to borrow this Lunik spacecraft right out from under the Soviets' noses. It's amazing they got away with it. But what did they learn? What were they hoping to find by getting a close look at this Lunik?
The big thing was examining it for factory markings.
Oh, interesting.
These markings, they can tell you a lot about Soviet industry, their technology, how many units were made, what kind of production processes were used, even who the manufacturers were.
So like a little hidden message that unlocks a whole new understanding.
Exactly.
Did those markings spill any secrets?
Oh, yeah. From what we can tell from those declassified reports, the Soviets never knew a thing.
Wow.
The markings actually revealed the likely manufacture of the Lunik's final stage, a crucial part of the puzzle. And get this. They were able to figure out the Soviets' parts numbering system.
So valuable intel that they could use for understanding other Soviet space hardware.
Exactly. It wasn't just about this one mission. It was about understanding their whole program.
Like fitting pieces into a giant puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned earlier that analysts were able to work out some pretty remarkable things just from the limited telemetry data they were able to intercept. What kind of stuff could they figure out from those faint signals?
Well, remember how the Soviets were initially claiming Lunik III had made a much closer flyby than it actually did? Like, they said it stayed within about 6,000 miles of the moon?
Right, trying to manage the story.
Yeah, making it seem like they were even more precise than they really were. But by meticulously analyzing the telemetry data, analysts actually determined Lunik III reached 291,000 miles from Earth at its farthest point.
Wow, that's way past the moon's orbit. What gave it away? Was there some kind of breakthrough in their analysis?
It seems like a top Soviet astronomer, maybe having second thoughts, quietly revealed to some Western contacts that Lunik III hadn't actually orbited the moon like they'd claimed.
So a little slip of the tongue?
Yeah, he let it slip that it actually passed behind the moon during its journey. And this little tidbit gave analysts that crucial clue to refine their calculations.
It's amazing how one little piece of information can change everything. Even with that insider knowledge, it must have been incredibly tough to track Lunik III without knowing its exact path.
It was a constant game of catch-up, relying on ELINT and just good old-fashioned deduction. They were able to pick out specific events in the data, like when a stage separated or when they made course corrections. And by comparing that to the estimated launch time, they could slowly map out the actual path.
Must have been so tense, those analysts working with these faint signals from space.
Oh, absolutely. And they didn't even know which telemetry channel corresponded to which measurement. It was like trying to break a code without the key. They had to work out what those signals meant painstakingly.
And they didn't have the calibration values for those instruments either, right? So they didn't know what the readings actually represented.
No, it was incredibly complex, frustrating.
It's pretty amazing what they were able to do.
Yeah, they were resourceful. They made progress by comparing data from different sources. So, for example, correlating the telemetry from the Lunik stage with the tracking data from those discarded ICBM tanks let them estimate the performance of each component.
It really shows their ingenuity, their determination.
They squeezed so much valuable information out of what seemed like very limited data.
And that spirit of ingenuity wasn't just limited to the analysts trying to decode Soviet secrets. The Soviets themselves were dealing with their own challenges, especially when it came to their ambitions for manned spaceflight.
You're right. They had this whole propaganda machine going, playing up their successes, creating this narrative of a super safe and carefully planned space program. But were there any hints in what they said publicly that showed the struggles they were facing behind the scenes?
It's interesting you say that, because we do have this quote from astronomer Kukarkin, who was often commenting on Soviet space achievements. Just days after the Lunik 3 launch, he told a radio audience, "It is now our task to achieve a speed near the moon, which will turn the rocket's last stage or the container into a permanent artificial satellite of the moon."
So even then, they were thinking ahead to bigger things, weren't they?
It sounds like they were laying the groundwork for future missions.
Absolutely, getting the public excited about what was coming next.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about scientific exploration for the sake of knowledge. They saw real-world applications for space tech, like satellites for communication.
Right, so not just national pride, it was strategic.
What kind of communication projects did they have in mind?
Well, they were particularly interested in developing these satellite-based television relay stations. Imagine that. The Soviets beaming their message, their view of the world, directly into homes all over the globe.
A whole new level of propaganda.
Exactly. But of course, the ultimate goal, the one that would really capture everyone's imagination, was manned spaceflight.
Oh, without a doubt. But like everything else in their space program, the Soviets were very careful about how they handled the idea of sending a human into space. Safety was paramount.
They knew all eyes would be on them.
Right. They had to be absolutely certain of success before attempting a manned mission. We have this quote from Professor Sedov, a key figure in their program, and he said, "It will not be easy to organize manned flights to other celestial bodies, and any haste is out of the question."
Very carefully chosen words.
Yeah, projecting confidence and competence while admitting it's risky.
And then it's interesting that even though they were obviously working towards manned spaceflight, they never actually admitted publicly that they had a cosmonaut training program. It was all very hush-hush.
Adds to the mystery.
Do you think they were deliberately trying to keep the U.S. in the dark about their progress?
It's certainly possible secrecy was key for them, both with the technology and the propaganda. By keeping things hidden, they controlled the story, kept the U.S. guessing.
It's remarkable what they were able to achieve, given the tech limitations of the time. What do you think were the biggest factors in their success?
I think it was a few things. They had a really solid base of scientists and engineers, a centralized system that could really focus on important projects, and a political leadership that was absolutely determined to win the space race, whatever it took.
And the people themselves. The scientists, engineers, technicians. Their dedication, their ingenuity made it all happen.
Absolutely. The Soviet space program is a story of human achievement, pushing those boundaries, reaching for new heights, both literally and figuratively.
And that spirit of exploration continues today as we keep reaching further into space, trying to answer those big questions about the universe and our place in it. Who knows what's out there waiting to be discovered?
That's exciting to think about.
As we explore this vast expanse, we carry the lessons from those who came before, those who dared to dream big and push the limits of what we can do. Thanks for joining us as we take this deep dive into the space race. Stay tuned for the final part. Okay, so we've uncovered a lot about Lunik III, the intelligence challenges, that incredible heist of a Soviet spacecraft, and their carefully crafted propaganda. But what did all this mean for the future of the space race? Did the Soviets hint at their long-term goals in space?
Oh, yeah. Even as they were celebrating Lunik III, they were already looking ahead, thinking bigger. They weren't content with just reaching the moon. They wanted a permanent presence in space.
Both around Earth and on the moon.
Exactly, a foothold.
We actually have this quote from astronomer Kukarkin. He was a frequent commentator on Soviet achievements, and just days after the Lunik III launch, he said, "It is now our task to achieve a speed near the moon which will turn the rocket's last stage, or the container, into a permanent artificial satellite of the moon." It seems like they were really setting the stage.
Yeah, getting the public ready for those next steps.
Right.
And it wasn't just about science for science's sake. They were eyeing practical uses for space tech, like satellites for communication.
Right, so it was strategic, not just about national pride. What kind of communication projects were they looking at?
Satellite-based television relay stations, that was a big one.
Wow, imagine that.
Think about the impact. The Soviets beaming their message, their perspective, directly into homes around the world.
Bypassing all the usual media outlets?
Unprecedented reach. It really shows how they saw space as this new frontier, not just for exploration, but for projecting their influence.
But of course, the biggest prize in the space race, the thing everyone would be talking about, was manned spaceflight.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But like everything else, the Soviets were very deliberate about how they talked about sending a human to space.
Right, they were very careful.
Safety was their top priority. Over and over, they said they wouldn't attempt it until they were completely sure of success.
Too much at stake.
Professor Sadov, he was a key figure in the program, and he said, It will not be easy to organize manned flights to other celestial bodies, and any haste is out of the question.
So they were acknowledging the risk, but still projecting confidence.
Exactly. And, even though it was obvious they were working towards it, they never actually admitted publicly that they had a cosmonaut training program.
All very secretive.
Do you think they were trying to keep the U.S. in the dark about how far along they were?
I think it's definitely possible secrecy was a big part of their strategy for both the technology and the propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Keep the U.S. guessing.
It's really incredible what they accomplished with the technology at that time. From launching Sputnik to taking pictures of the far side of the moon, they really achieved some groundbreaking things. What do you think were the key factors in their success?
I think it was a combination of things. They had a really strong foundation in science and engineering, a system that could prioritize resources, and a leadership that was fully committed to winning the space race.
No matter the cost?
But also the people involved. The scientists, the engineers, the technicians, their dedication and their ingenuity made it happen.
The Soviet space program, it really is a story of human achievement, pushing the limits, reaching for something new.
It really is.
And that spirit of exploration, it's still alive today. As we venture further out into space, seeking those answers about the universe and our place in it. What do you think? What awaits us out there? What incredible discoveries.
Hard to say, but it's exciting to think about.
As we continue this journey into space, we carry with us the lessons from those who came before, those who dared to dream big and push the limits of what's possible. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the heart of the space race. Until next time, keep looking up.